recording. Okay, well, hello. I'm Jill Featherstone, not director of the Art Center. Boy, I really got a promotion then today. I'm Director of Museum Education and Interpretation. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this virtual program this afternoon, 21 interventions, slideshow, and celebration. And as we begin, although we are in a virtual space together, we are all in real places individually. And I'd like to begin this program by acknowledging the land that is under our feet in those real spaces. So if you'll just take a moment to ground yourself in whatever way you feel comfortable. For me, it will be putting 2 feet kind of securely on the floor and connecting with the floor and thinking about the ground underneath me. And I'm going to give a land acknowledgement. These lands on which we gather is the traditional and ancestral land of the Native Americans who preceded us, and we honor those who are still with us. Thank you. So as I mentioned, tonight's program is inspired by actually I haven't mentioned this yet, our 2021 Iowa Artist Exhibition, which is featuring the work of Olivia Valentine. And if you haven't visited the museum since March 12th, when the exhibition opened, I sure encourage you to do so. It is one of the most extraordinary interventions that I have seen in 2 decades of working at the Art Center. It's so wholly original and sensitive, and it uses the architecture as medium and light as medium in superb ways. So please come and visit Olivia's exhibition. It runs in the Richard Meyer building and in the IMP building. And that was the inspiration for tonight's program. And before I introduce you to today's host, I'm here to recite what our Zoom preferences are for tonight. So please feel free to use the chat throughout for comments and remembrances and even kind of concurrent dialogue with what Mia is talking about when she gets through the slideshows. But otherwise, we'll ask you to keep yourself muted until the end of the slideshow. And when it's finished, we'll have time for an open conversation. It might be a little bit like a Q&A, but we really hope that it is more of an open dialogue with everyone sharing things. And then I do want to mention, I don't know if you can see them behind me, but I posted up our cocktail recipes for tonight. And we want to give a shout out to Whitney Courtney Nastanovich at the Bartender's Handshake on Ingersoll for the cocktail recipes, and artist Cat Rocket Ship for the lively illustration. So I kind of created my own little version of that here in my cheers glass, and it's tasty. Oh my gosh, I love Saint Germain. So thank you to them. And now on to Mia. Mia Boo has volunteered, taught, and worked for 7 years at the Art Center in various roles, moving into her current position of museum educator during the first 2 months of the pandemic last year in April of 2020. It was nuts. Mia believes that all voices belong in a contemporary art museum and strives to foster connections between her community, artwork, and one another. Mia is originally from Des Moines, and she is an artist and an innate guide and is happiest while showing people new things. So please help me welcome Mia Boo.
Thank you. Thanks, Jill. And thank you guys all so very much for gathering today. I loved that Jill already let you guys know that this presentation was inspired by Olivia Valentine's work. And one thing that feels so good about working for an art museum, and particularly the Art Center, is that the work that we create can be deeply inspired, and just experiencing artwork can lead us to do continual work. So I'm so happy that it came to me to want to present and really look back and explore interventions that have been on display through this museum within the last 25 years, and tying in a little bit of my own personal experience with the works, and then asking the folks who are here today to reflect a little bit about their experiences viewing artworks, maybe specifically these artworks or other interventions that they've had a relationship with in their lives and in their history of art viewing. So I would love to begin. First of all, I'd like to welcome you guys to the Des Moines Art Center. Well, virtually, and specifically in this photo, I'm welcoming you guys to the Richard Meyer building, which was constructed in 1985 for the Des Moines Art Center. Today, we are going to look back at 21 different site-specific installations that engage with the architecture of the museum. At first, 21 just felt like this perfect serendipitous number. It had gotten to the point where I thought, wow, then actually this is way too many. And then as I parsed them out and put them in chronological order, I discovered there is a flow and there is a way to present these in this old school slideshow fashion where we're looking and learning and really spending time with the work. So in order to do that, some of the works that we're going to investigate, we're going to look at for maybe 30 seconds, and then others we're going to get more in depth with. And in fact, the first works that we're going to view, we actually have the artist present with us in a very serendipitous way that happened. And I'm so grateful that Lewis de Soto is here to speak personally about his own work. So that's something that we're going to be moving into. The event today celebrates artists who innovate spaces, from Lewis de Soto to our current Iowa artists on display in our galleries now, Olivia Valentine. This slideshow and event were inspired by both of their works and my own personal want to explore them within a timeline of other artists, working within the same spaces, the very familiar spaces for a lot of us, the Des Moines Art Center, and at the same time creating wildly different works in these spaces. So what we just looked at and what we're looking at again are close-ups of the work from Lewis de Soto's show. And I want you guys to keep in mind as we're going through these works and looking at all of these different interventions, that all of the pieces that we're looking at exist within a much larger context of space and time. Now that's true for all art, but I really think that it's something that's extraordinary when it comes to an installation work or an intervention work. When and where they were installed and displayed and how they reflected in the lives of people who viewed them is extremely important. So as we go through these works, I'm wanting you to remember where you were in relation to these exhibitions. Did you get to see them opening night? There's nothing like an opening night reception, the energy of a brand new exhibition. Did you never get a chance to see them in person, but maybe you viewed them in an exhibition catalog or on a friend's social media page? Did you maybe see some of these works installed in different spaces? Some of them traveled to different museums or came from other institutions. So did you get a chance to see them somewhere else? I want you to wonder, what was your life like at this time when the works were displayed? Who were you when you were approaching this work? What was your relationship to art? What was your life like? How did this work resonate or reflect on you and with you? So today we are starting 25 years ago with an exhibition that utilized every wing of the Des Moines Art Center. The show was called Four Interventions, and the work was by Californian artist Lewis de Soto. Here's a close-up of one of his works, Shadow. Lewis de Soto is an artist of Cahuilla origin. His work examines and speculates about the nature of our understanding of reality from scientific, cultural, and religious viewpoints. Often his work contrasts American indigenous viewpoints with the contemporary post-colonized world. His recent book, Empire, of photographs and essays, documents the vast area east of Los Angeles known as the Inland Empire. In 2020, he published a book, Tired of Eternity, which is a book of stories and scientific treatises on faster than light travel and the autobiography of the mythical being Coyote and his extraterrestrial origins. De Soto currently resides in Napa, California and Channel Islands Beach, California. He studied religion and art at the UC Riverside, receiving a BA in studio art in 1978. He received an MFA at Claremont Graduate University in 1981. He works in multiple media, namely photography, sculpture, installation, sound, and video. And I am personally a very big fan. So this is wonderful to have happen today. So we are beyond honored to have Lewis as a guest for our program. And he's agreed to present a bit about his work that he created in '95 and his experience working with the architecture of the Des Moines Art Center. So Lewis, if you could unmute yourself and say hi to the group.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me all right?
You sound great.
Okay, good. Yeah, 1995, actually late 94, I was invited by Michael Danoff, who was the director at the time, to visit the Des Moines Arts Center. And he just said, "You won't believe the architecture here." And so I went, and I was kind of blown away by all of it, and also was taken by the different character of each wing. So I went back and I thought about it for a while, and thought about the history of Des Moines, the history of the Art Center, its location, and then some of the characteristics of the wings of the Art Center. So the first slide that we saw, the one that's called Shadow, was related to the history of coal mining in Des Moines. And if you even go to a current State of Iowa website, you will see dotted abandoned mines or active mines in Iowa, but there is a ribbon of mines that run along the Des Moines River. In fact, there's a lot of tunnels that run under downtown Des Moines that were used for coal mining. So I used this area here to remark on that and expose the sort of vein of coal that lies underneath everything else. So that is that piece. And shadow also refers to the shadow of flooding, the memory of flooding that occurs in Des Moines. Even, let's see, there we go. As you can see, the Meyer wings changed a little bit. The planter that was there is gone. But what I did is I created an area that we could flood with water, about 6 inches of water, and allow us to sort of experience a kind of safe flood in a sense. And so you could walk down and view the water. A lot of people it was during the summer, so a lot of people waded in to the courtyard and sort of wandered around in the shallow water. The other, the wing that I was very interested in was the IMP wing. And I think we have a picture of that, yes. This is what was in the wing at the time. One of the things about IMP's architecture is that he doesn't like vents. He doesn't like the vents you get off the shelf and put in buildings to run air conditioning. So if you look at the slide, you'll see on the far left side, there's a vertical line. And then if you look up top, there's another horizontal line. And if you look at the very front, at the base of the wall by the Glaze Oldenburg, there's another horizontal line. Those were all intake and exhaust vents. And the first thing I noticed when I walked into the space was there was a sound that the air conditioning was making. It was almost like a kind of instrument sound, but it was faint. So one of the things that I did is I added microphones to the intake vent and then put speakers in the space that then played back the sound but made it louder. Here's the ancient video of the night. Of the air conditioning system, and then it would fade out. And I called the project Sigh. So it was like breathing out and then allowing the breath to sort of go away. And then some people really liked the sound. And then Mike told me later that the children seemed to be frightened by it and they didn't like being in there. So it wasn't a big hit with everybody. Anyway, and the other space that I worked with was the Alail Saarinen wing. What we did is we wanted to reactivate the space, and sometimes I refer to it as hot rodding something, taking something that's already there and then looking at the characteristics and increasing the performance, let's say, of the space. So one of the things we did is we renewed the coating on the And we also rubbed down the walls with orange oil, which gave this beautiful scent that kind of gave it a sense of aliveness. And then there was a projection from 1948, which is when the building was finished, from a book that Saarinen wrote. That was about this idea of penetrating in the mystery of life. But it's a kind of interesting thing because he uses the word chambers, and he says one cannot enter the deepest chambers of the mystery of life. So this is actually twirling around the kind of like a whirlpool in the space. And it's just a light projection that people could stand on or walk through or sit and read.
Thank you so much. It's so fascinating. I love, my love for your work came from when I was touring, and I just loved sneaking shadow up on people because it's still installed. If you come to the Des Moines Art Center, it'll be here forever. And it's such a powerfully symbolic work, and it has so much meaning, but it's so unassuming. And so I loved learning about shadow, and then it was wonderful to hear about the other work. So I always end up telling the story about the other interventions that came along with it. So,
you know, when I want to tell somebody about the Des Moines Art Center piece, I often just tell them to go to Google Earth because you can see it from space.
I should have grabbed a screenshot of that.
Yeah.
Well, at least now we can give everyone an assignment. So Google Earth,
Yes, Google Earth.
And check out Shadow from Above. So,
all right. Well,
thank you.
I'll answer any questions during question time. I'll be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lewis, for real. Thank you for joining us and giving us some information. So the program today, again, came to me while I was speaking to Olivia about her then upcoming exhibition called Mediate Equivocate. And when I was talking to Olivia, who also is here, which is great that you're both here, I noticed that she personally also uses the word intervention to describe her site-specific installations. And for me, even working within a museum, this isn't a term I hear every day, but I personally really connect to the idea of it, the idea of what an intervention is, an artist creating an intervention, utilizing space, putting a juxtaposition of an artwork within a space, and the relationship that happens between those. And so I asked Olivia if she had any awareness of de Soto's exhibition from 1995. And at that time she didn't. I'm glad now we all do. But because having moved to Des Moines years after, she hadn't had a chance to experience it or hear of it. And then I thought about how I only knew about 4 interventions because it was my own personal research for the Des Moines Art Center as a docent about 6 years ago. And a lot of times I still often think about how if I had had a chance to see de Soto's work in person during the time that it was on exhibition, I know for a fact that it would have changed very much how I connected to art. I was 7 years old and I lived in Des Moines. And when you're young, you think art is just drawing and painting. And even though I love drawing and painting, I think if I had known early on that art could be so many different things, it would have blown my mind. And I'm only bringing this up to emphasize the ephemeral nature of art exhibitions, the ephemeral nature of interventions, and how when you can experience them in person, it truly can be transformational, and it should not be missed if possible. And that's my stance on that. So we're going to keep moving along through our history. Our next stop on the timeline, the scope gets much narrower from the entire museum to an artwork that was displayed on a single window. The American sculptor Tony Fayer created this piece that we're looking at titled Untitled Blue Window, using very precise lengths of painter's tape layered in a very specific way. He had helpers help him install it, and he was so particular about how it was installed that only certain people could really grasp his method for this process. And the end effect is this beautiful mosaic. It's also really interesting to see the way that it affected the whole space. This piece itself was within a larger exhibition that was titled Aisle 5 in 2005. It featured artists using everyday materials to create their work, which is a common theme that we're going to notice in the slideshow today. It was also the Art Center's introduction to the artist Tony Fayer. the beginning of a larger relationship with the artist, who went on to have his own solo show at the Des Moines Art Center in 2012. I hope a lot of you guys got to see that one as well, which included quite a few interventions using common everyday objects, and it was very wonderful and magical, I would say. Our next intervention, this work here, is from 2009. It was created by artist Tara Donovan, who also had work in the exhibition Aisle 5. She had a piece in that show as well. This show was simply titled Tara Donovan, and it was organized by the Institute of Contemporary Art Boston. Tara, who was pregnant with twins at the time of this installation, she came prepared with her own team of powerful creative women, as well as members from the Art Center's installation team, minus those who were occupied downtown installing the brand new John and Mary Papa John Sculpture Park. Tara had a very specific vision for how this work would look, and the installers had tasks involving cutting the styrofoam cups, standing on lifts and ladders, and lots of hot gluing to create the clouds that make up the sculpture haze. This is a closer look of the same work. Also, this show was the first museum survey of American artist Tara Donovan, featuring sculptures and installations created over a decade of her work, exploring the transformative effects of accumulation and aggregation. The show was presented in 2 locations, the main Art Center building on Grand Avenue, and some of you may remember the Art Center downtown, a smaller, almost like pop-up location that existed downtown. And it was a site that would close immediately after the Tara Donovan show. So if you were lucky enough, you got to see her show in both spaces. Here's another work from that show. This work was created with thousands of plastic drinking straws that had to be ordered from Florida to Tara's specifications. Then silicone caulking was applied to the 12-foot by 14-foot wall. The large installation team that they had worked by opening and cutting boxes so that you could pull a whole box worth of straws out at one time and stick them to the wall. So personally, this is where my own history jumps into the timeline of our event today. This was the first intervention that I got to see in person at the Des Moines Art Center. I was 20 years old and I felt entranced by this work. I was advised by a guards to step away from the straws, and I will never forget. The pull to them was so physical. I really couldn't even understand how creating and envisioning this work was possible, how someone could decide or understand or figure out how they were going to make a work using this material and in this way. And I also feel good saying that everything else that I'm going to share to you today I was able to experience with my own eyes. Again, I hope that you are also considering your own history as we move through the presentation. According to Jay Ewart, the Art Center's chief preparator of installations, Barlow started it all. She blew our minds and tested the space to its fullest capacity. This work here was a part of Phillida Barlow's show in 2013. The cargo containers for the show, which was titled Scree, were literally jam-packed, and items had to be attached to chains to pull them out. Prior to the install, the walls of the IMP building had to be weight load tested with 50-pound sandbags to see how exactly her work, which weighed more than 12 tons, would be hung and built within the IMP building. The images from this that we're going to go through are all from her exhibition catalog, which is a beautiful thing if you have it. The wing of the IMP building was built in 1968 and is a classically brutalist poured concrete structure with rigid geometry and expansive windows. And according to the exhibition description, it was named a perfect backdrop to the artist's continual investigation and response to the minimalist legacy. I like the contrast of thinking of Barlow as a minimalist when her work is just so full, but I understand that relationship. Phillida Barlow herself was born in Newcastle upon Tyne, England in 1944, and her artwork is inspired by urban environments. Barlow uses cardboard, plywood, plaster, and cement with vibrantly colored paint and fabrics in her monumental sculptural works. The title of this exhibition, Scree, is named after the debris of fallen rocks found at the base of a mountain. Not only did Barlow jam-pack an entire building for this exhibition, but she also curated the main gallery using works from our permanent collection to emphasize her inspiration as an artist. Another work that took over a singular space is the intervention titled Put Me Down Gently by artist Sheila Pepe from 2015. This spiderwebbing weaved interlacing of the Richard Meyer atrium was made of metallic and acrylic yarn and was a part of a massive museum spanning exhibition titled Fiber, Sculpture 1960 to Present. Pepe's work engaged with not only the architecture, but the premise of the show really beautifully. Pepe is interested in domestic and industrial materials. They seek to explore feminist and craft traditions, asking questions of acceptable art making. Fiber Sculpture 1960 to Present looked at work spanning more than 40 years of artists who were interested in having the same conversation, challenging gender, craft, and material within the fine art scope. This was a traveling exhibition that was curated by Janelle Porter of the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston. Only two of the works featured in this slideshow are permanent additions to the museum. The first being Shadow by Lewis de Soto, and the second is this work, created in 2017 by artist Rachel Sussman. The work is titled Sidewalk Kintsukuroi and was installed for the exhibition Alchemy, Transformations in Gold, which brought together a group of international artists whose work incorporates gold or another metal disguised as gold. Sidewalk Kintsukuroi expands on the traditional Japanese art of kintsukuroi, which means to repair with gold, which is traditionally performed on ceramics. Sussman took it literally out into the streets. At the heart of this idea of such golden repair is that something is made more beautiful for having been broken. In preparation for this permanent addition to the Saarinen lobby floor, Sussman looked in many different locations within the museum for where to install. Once the lobby crack was chosen, it had to be excavated using heavy-duty marinating with chemical stripper to clean out years of floor wax, food, and debris. It took 3 days to clear out the crud in the crack. This in-ground installation was created with tree sap-based resin and a combination of bronze and 23.5 karat gold dust applied carefully by Sussman using a chalk purr. And I've got a little video of Sussman doing that. So here is a photograph of the work Tape Des Moines. And I used this artwork as the image for this event very intentionally, because to this day, guests still ask if this work, which was created in 2017, is still on view. People say, where's the tape sculpture? And this exhibition that was part of the exhibition that was part of, called Drawing in Space, brought in some of the biggest and youngest crowds the Art Center had seen. The work was titled Tape Des Moines, and it took a year of intense preparation and back and forth communication. Models were made, mock-ups, there were integrity tests and CAD drawings for the Art Center, and the artist collective that created it named Newman for Use, so that they were able to pull this off. Tape Des Moines was not the first interactive packing tape tunnel created by Newman for Use, but it was to be their longest one ever, longest to be displayed. So a lot of the works that they had made were only up for a short period of time, and this work was on view for 3 months. And it was also the first tape tunnel that they created in the United States. So much had to be figured out and adapted as it was going up and on view. The work spanned both the upper and lower levels of the IMP building, though some tunnels were closed off with tape so that in areas that maybe was too high off of the ground. So the area that was above the lower pay, you could not crawl through. They had like tape walls built within the tunnel. It took 11 people, 15 very long work days to erect the structure. And they started by running back and forth with disassembled tape guns on a paint roller. And then, one of the steps that I hadn't even considered was that once the structure was built, they all had to crawl inside a very, very sticky tape tunnel to lay the internal tape. So it's sandwiched so that it's not sticky. So I was informed that they were just constantly getting stuck. Your hair would get stuck, your hands would get stuck, in order to create a smooth surface on the inside of the sculpture that could be accessed and crawled through. Guests were not allowed inside on Wednesdays so that our team could deep clean the entire thing with Clorox wipes. Folks couldn't wear their shoes, and in fact, the Art Center had to buy a stash of socks and start doing sock laundry so that we could make the tunnel accessible to guests who might not have brought socks. There were often long lines to get inside the work. I remember telling certain people to come on Thursday nights so that they could actually get in. Sometimes we'd have to close before people made it through. And then we had to keep adapting rules to ensure both visitors and the artwork were safe. When it was first open, we're like, this is fun, have fun. And then folks were jumping and running. And then we said, it's also art and it's also made out of tape. So we had to refigure what it meant to be safe within this artwork. The artwork, like I said, took 15 days to put up, and it took only a couple of box cutters and about 40 minutes to deinstall this work. So we're going to visit all of the installations that were part of the Drawing in Space exhibition from 2017. And I know it's hard to believe that other works could have even been displayed alongside Tape Des Moines, but mind-blowing enough, all 4 of these works were truly incredible. All of the artists were able to visit the museum prior to the exhibition, and perfectly enough, they all wanted and were best suited for different spaces within the museum. In this work, artist Hee-Sop Yoon created her work Still Life Chandelier within the 3-story Meyer atrium. Her tape drawing, depicting tangles of cables, electronics, and household items, was created in advance on large rectangular mylar panels. Yoon worked on a 45-foot lift in solitary space. She wore headphones as she worked, and she had one assistant with her on the lift helping her to install the panels on the wall. Another cool feature that happened with the Drawing in Space exhibition was we had videos created for each of the artists on view. So I'm going to share with you the video created for Hee-Sop Yoon.
My name is Hee-Sop Yoon, and this is my piece, Still Life Chandelier. After graduate school in Korea, I was exploring with a lot of different material for drawing. And tape was one of my material that I found at that time. I really like the quality of the line. When I have a project, the first thing I usually do is go to the space and just try to come up with the idea about like how the entire piece will sit in the space. And once I finish that stage, I come back to studio and try to find the images that I like to put in the drawing. I usually work section by section in my studio. So I put a bunch of mylar together on my wall, and then I just start draw freehand. Once I put the line on the surface, I don't erase or I don't make corrections. And if I want to make changes, I just keep add more lines on top of existing lines. For this particular installation, I think there are 67 sheets of mylar. Once I'm done with the drawing, I give each mylar a number and make a little map of the drawing that shows which number goes to where. So like installing the piece is just like putting together a really big puzzle. The piece that I made for Drawing in Space depicts the accumulation of many objects that are from the photographs that I took from a lot of different locations across the world, where everything is jumbled and disorganized. All of these objects are usually meant to be hidden. I decide to represent them as a form of chandelier that spills down from top of the ceiling to the bottom of the wall. I wanted to make the piece that can direct people to move around and explore the space. There are a lot of hidden areas that you can see the piece from. All those little discovering moments are very important to me, and that's the big part of my work.
I like that Aesop mentioned the little discovering moments, because that's another interesting thing that Olivia Valentine works with within the same space of the Meyer Wing. So one feature of this work that I'm also interested in is how Aesop had the big long mylar panels, but then she free-handed the edges with tape. So all the finishing edges, these details she was able to add after installing. And also, if you really liked that film, all the other videos from Drawing in Space are on our YouTube page if you wanted to check those out. The work that Aesop created looked so at home on the what most people consider the underutilized Meyer wall that many visitors, I remember saying that they didn't understand why we couldn't keep it. Like, why can't you just keep it? She already went all that work. But the thing is, that's how these interventions work. They're temporary so that the spaces can keep being reimagined. And we're going to see other visions brought to life against this wall soon. Within this work, artist Dave Epley turned the installation into a party. He's a Grateful Dead fan, and he had music playing as many hands created this beautiful work titled Set 1, Set 2. It was created using cut vinyl. Epley thought of this design a lot like a Grateful Dead live concert. Set 1 was a carefully crafted set list of songs, orderly, makes sense. And I remember him saying that this is the part that was the hardest for him. And then set 2 was a wild, free-flowing, and inspired jam session. Many of the installers had a lot of creative freedom as they were helping him install this, and it was almost like people were creating art together on the Saarinen floor. The creation of this work was extremely collaborative and joyful. Epley was even involved in a project with Finley Elementary School in Des Moines, and he created a second installation that was displayed on the outside of the Meyer building. The students titled this work, Mile a Minute Rainbow Ivy. And here's a photo of that work. He created this in collaboration with the students. He had the students through a virtual instruction, so he visited their classes virtually, and he had them create the flower elements. And then he put them all together in this vining structure that he put on the side of the Meyer building. All three of the last artists that we reviewed created works for Drawing in Space in a very public way. They created them during open hours. They had signs next to them explaining what was going on, and the artist would even stop to chat with visitors or answer questions. The fourth artist to create work for Drawing in Space was Polish artist Monika Grizmala, and she created her installation in a very different way. The main gallery in which her work, Ram Jait Nun, which is also means drawing spatially, when she created it was completely closed off. I don't know if anyone's ever been to the art center in between exhibitions, but the main gallery has these massive doors that can be completely closed on the front side, and then on the back side we have to have these screens. She did not need any help from the art center staff to create her massive room drawing out of tape. So therefore each line is a direct product of her single movements and gestures, an expression of a single artist's work and vision. Grizmala was a Tony and Tim Urban International Artist in Resident, which is used to honor an artist of Jewish heritage. While this work was on view, Monica also had an exhibition of her work on display in the community Tiferet Israel Synagogue, and she gave an incredible artist lecture. She had a video on display with this work. She had drawings, and personally, she had me obsessed with her lines. This was my favorite work out of the entire drawing in space exhibition. This work here is a part of another large group exhibition, and it was Marie Lorenzo's Gyre, which was created for the exhibition Wanderlust in 2017. Marie Lorenz roots her work in exploration and narrative. She travels to various urban waterways in boats that she designs and builds, collecting the tidal debris that accumulates in the harbor. Gyre, which references whirling or gyrating, was created during a time that Lorenz spent at the Kohler factory casting the debris items out of porcelain. Surprisingly, this stunning intervention was not too intense to install. A small team built off the atrium beams to be able to make multiple connections for the lines of ceramic works. There was a very specific knot that needed to be used to tie the pieces onto the string, and none of them fell. Lorenz knew and communicated the specific patterning and was very intimately involved with creating with two art center team members who helped her hang the work. So in this photo, you can see a group of folks engaging with the work and getting a different perspective. This group was actually a part of a artist workshop that was connected to Wanderlust with artist Todd Shalom, leading a workshop teaching people how to do participatory walks. And so this was one of the elements of a specific participatory walk that happened. For the installation of River, created in 2018 by Iowa artist Jen Bervin, the Art Center's team had to learn how to work with unfamiliar materials. I like looking at it from this distance because it is kind of hard to tell what it is, but I've got the list of materials there in the caption. Jen Bervin had a vision for her mapping of the Mississippi River. She wanted it to move and climb the wall and ceiling of the concrete IMP building, and our installation team had to figure out how it could be done. They ran wires using the studs in the wall. They drew it taut and attached wire with string. In suspension, the team had to stitch Velcro to sequence pieces that fit together like puzzle pieces with wire armatures. The work itself, which took Bervin 12 years to create by hand, the same amount of time that Bervin says it would take to walk the entire river, was installed so that it mirrored the actual Mississippi. So looking up at it as if you were underneath. Here's a detail shot where you can see the silver sequence. Without You, the World Goes On was an exhibition by British artist Susan Collis, again utilizing the large vertical plane of the Richard Meyer atrium. This, I would say, is possibly the simplest of the interventions today. Titled Something Between Us, is a 540-inch graphite line that starts at the top of the wall and it moves towards the ground. It was, in fact, created by Collis's husband, Peter, because she is afraid of heights. She showed him how to make the smallest movements with his hand, falling with gravity, following the pebbling of the wall and the texture. He was in a lift with a pencil touching the wall as Jay controlled the lift from below, which aided him and created the line. At the end of it, the line looked like an incredibly realistic 540-inch crack in one unbroken motion. The crack, asking us what kinds of things we just walked by and not noticed, looked so realistic that, in fact, I heard a story that a contractor who was visiting the museum exclaimed, "Holy expletive," when he saw it. I can only imagine what kind of damage he thought was happening on the wall. The summer of 2018 brought the Des Moines Art Center the groundbreaking exhibition Queer Abstraction and the inclusion of Felix Gonzalez Torres's work, Untitled Water, which created a tangible and transformative experience within the exhibition. For its installation, a large collective of individuals came up with the process. There was a call for extra hands filled by volunteer Art Center staff. And if you look, the first person all the way on the end, that would be myself. I'm very glad that I got to help with the installation of this work. The staff were divided into roles of spoolers, cutters, and hangers, working with the turquoise, clear, and silver plastic beads, which could only be provided by one supplier. Once the beads were pulled in a specific pattern, they were then hung up on the railing, and a plastic hair pick was used to give them their perfect spacing. At the end of the exhibition, at the end of the installation, the exhibition's curator, Jared Ledesma, personally trimmed every single strand by hand at the bottom. This work was beautiful and unavoidable. There was no way not to go through it. The Felix Gonzalez Torres Foundation would not permit the Art Center to simply hang the work within one doorway, as that form of installation of the work had been done in the past. We had to think of a more conceptual, thoughtful way to include the work in the exhibition. So an enclosure was created within the I&P space using the artwork. Visitors had a wide range of response to this work: joy, laughter, calming, profoundly moving. If you were able to see it in person, one of the gorgeous elements was that the HVAC system in the pay wing had been turned up a little bit, which was the idea of our facilities director. And it caused the beads to have an undulating motion when people weren't passing through them. So it was very soothing and beautiful. This work, created by artist Carla Black for her retrospective, Carla Black 20 Years, was playful and ethereal. The exhibition sadly cut short due to the Art Center's pandemic closure in 2020, but this work still exists on our website as a virtual gallery tour experience. So if you were one of the folks who didn't get to visit but would have normally seen this exhibition, you can still have some form of engagement with it in a 3D experience virtually on our website. The creation of Black's two works that were installed in the I&P building, titled Gives Rise and Permission Is, looked a lot like procuring an extensive list of needed materials. Specific products came from overseas, lipsticks were donated by the community, plaster, cellophane, gold leaf, body butters, colored glass of very specific brands and colors. The result was a work that was beautiful and ephemeral and sensory. Black wanted it to be in a direct relationship with your body, to be very physical. The work had a smell, and the ventilation in the pay wing created dances of movement. The gold leaf pieces on the floor were attached simply by dabs of Vaseline. So they were held, but they had a lot of movement and room to be fluttery, almost like little flame flickers. Her work in lower pay had to be put on a plastic tarp, and they had to consider how they were going to clean it up before they even decided how to install it. The reason why is because since it's made of plaster, if it were to get wet, it would adhere permanently to the floor, hence the plastic tarp. The plaster was mixed with pigment, and then I'm so glad I found out how this was done, because when I saw this in person, I didn't understand. The plaster was mixed with pigment, and then it was tossed in handfuls from one edge of the tarp to the other as the installers were walking backwards. So they started on the edge near the windows, tossing handfuls in front of them and moving backwards. There were also auxiliary tossers on the sides that would throw plaster from flanking motions on the sides. And one thing, so the plaster was installed by Installations, but then Carla Black came and added some additional touches. One was that she added fistfuls of body butter plopped on top of the work. And then you can see the jars of the body butter that were placed beside it and the lids. And that was a thought that Carla had after the work was installed, because she felt like it was having a direct conversation with the Solowit piece in the background, adding shapes and colors that reflect the work. And here is a close-up of those body butters just resting on the plaster. So now we are going to return to the Des Moines Art Center galleries in the present day, and we're going to view the catalyst for our program today. Some words about the work from the essay written by Shannon Ray Stratton, Executive Director of Oxbow School of Art and Artist Registry. Mediate, equivocate draws attention to itself by making something that is usually small and intimate, like a stitch or the yarns in a weft, abnormally gigantic. It manifests a suture that appears to connect the cultural assets of the museum, both the architecture of Richard Meyer, who designed the wing, and the artworks held in the collection, which have become embedded in the art historical imagination as valuable, both monetarily and intellectually. So what you're seeing in this image are these large ropes that are interwoven within the Richard Meyer wing. The work spanning both the front and back of the massive Meyer atrium wall. Large white cotton ropes, they appear to stitch and weave through the wall. So now we're looking at the reverse of what we were just seeing. They intersect and bypass the art and architecture of the space. And looking at it like the Collis crack, it has a simplicity. However, it is an astounding installation. And looking closely still doesn't answer the question, how was it done? The work is an expansion and explosion of what we all experience in many ways. All clothing, common objects, details of what is unseen, holding everything together. This work stitches the Meyer and Pei wing together, as Olivia has a second intervention located in Lower Pei for this exhibition. Like I had mentioned earlier, Olivia is also interested in using the architecture and the spaces that don't normally get used within the Richard Meyer wing. It's been a real joy to be in the space with her work and seeing people moving into alcoves and balconies where they wouldn't normally have ventured into, because her work is pulling them there. So again, here is one of her artworks that's displayed slightly behind the pillar on the wall. And then you also see the ropes again on the floor, using that underutilized space. The stitches remind us of the collective of all of us, connection. I feel like this work is quiet and it requires work from us and time and attention. The work is gentle with you. It changes throughout the day. But I feel like that's a lesson all of the interventions seek from us, is to give them time, to be present with them, to physically put ourselves in the space of these works. It's an invitation to be physically present with the objects and ideas and connections that are bigger than all of us. Mediate, equivocate reflects the tension that we all feel right now. The ropes could have been pulled taut, but they're not. It is easy to still feel the weight of the ropes resting and nodding. This exhibition beautifully punctuates the time that we are in. It exists right now within a time of grieving and accommodations. The show itself had to be pushed back due to the pandemic, and the concept and work within the exhibition had to change and evolve during the time that it was materializing. It has been a beautiful experience spending time with her work. It has honestly felt like a gift, like moments of mindful breathing when things feel overwhelming or ungrounded. And I'm so glad to be able to engage with it, to be inspired by, and to celebrate this incredible intervention within a beautiful history of artists, reimagining and providing transformational experiences and exhibitions at the Des Moines Arts Center. So I want to thank you guys all so much for joining me and joining all of us today. Thank you for taking this small journey with me and giving our time and attention to these incredible interventions and artworks and artists. It's what I love doing, and I hope everyone here who loves the Des Moines Arts Center loves doing it as well. So it's time now. If anyone wants to open a dialogue or have question and answer, Lewis had said that he is open for questions. So you can go ahead and unmute yourself. We can do it like that.
Someone has just responded in the chat. They were really impressed by the HVAC intervention.
Yeah, it was interesting that there were actually like 3 or 4 different people that used the HVAC in there. I think Mr. De Soto was he was the trailblazer on that.
It seems like it.
I also invite you guys to,
if you go to other IMP buildings, they all have a different kind of sound to them because of the slots are all different shapes according to his floor plans. So if you go to the Washington D.C. Portrait Gallery Museum, it's got a different sound to it. It's a really low pitch sound.
awesome, thank you.
Mia, I've got a question for Lewis.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So hi, I'm Laura Burkhalter. I'm one of the curators at the Des Moines Arts Center, and I'm from Des Moines, and like Jill and Mia have been at the Art Center for quite a while. And so one of the things that I have noticed about sort of seeing your piece probably every day for the last 20 years is, well, it sort of looks, you know, when they've gone out there with the leaf blower and it's this beautiful black hole against the white building, it has this sort of, you know, wonderful sort of minimalist aesthetic to it. But one of the things I actually like is that, you know, when I walk by in the fall, it has colorful leaves on it. When I walk by in the winter, there's snow. In the summer, there's pollen. How do you feel about sort of that interaction with the very changeable Iowa weather and landscape?
I actually have a lot of photographs of it. Lots of people have sent me photographs of various states. I really like the way it looks after it snowed, and then because there's heat from the building, there's a vault underneath, and it sort of melts the snow away first. It really looks very dramatic. And I've seen it with leaves too, and it's really beautiful. I think it's just it's supposed to be outdoors. It's not a minimalist piece in that regard, although it kind of looks like it at first. It is supposed to be part of the fabric of Des Moines, so it seems appropriate to me.
I also want to welcome if anyone wants to share their own personal reflections experiencing any of the works that we talked about today. It's more than welcome.
So there is a question in the chat about the notion of interventions. Instead of purchasing art, when did interventions in museums begin? And I know that Laura is here, and it might be a little bit more well suited to answer that than Mia. Mia and I come from museum education, and while we do have a good grasp of art history, Laura might be the most appropriate, or maybe Lewis, to talk about that.
I mean, I'm going to say at least 100 years, because I mean, the early modernists, the Dadaists, were creating sort of gallery spaces that, you know, were a unique space to present art. They were, or, you know, doing chaotic performances in various places. It's not quite the same as what we think of as interventions, but certainly the seeds are there. And then that sort of carries through, you know, to the beginnings of performance art in the 60s. So you know, and it probably goes back even further than that. But in sort of that's sort of the very standard art historical answer that I have.
And I
I
know
have
there
to
are
say,
other.
I was going to mention
callers.
that the word intervention itself is a sort of like an interruption or a kind of reinterpretation of something that exists already. And so the idea is that the architect, and in this case, really three super strong architects, they had a vision about what comprises of what a museum needs to look like for certain reasons. And I think that when an artist comes in, they may not notice those original reasons at all. They may respond to something else, which is in their experience. And the relationship is one of being an interloper, kind of coming in and disrupting some of the things that we think about the space that might be invisible to most people that seem visible to the artist, and things that they want to draw together in that way. So that's one of the reasons why I used the word intervention originally when I was working with Mike, and he had me come in and work with it because we had no idea. He just said, come over and look at the space and let me know if you want to do anything here. And so that's what I came up with. But there was the idea of sort of either looking at things that are secret, like the sort of the dialogue, the book that Saarinen wrote about architecture. Of course, is, not everyone's going to read that. And then I wanted to be able to sort of use Saarinen's own words in his own space. And so that's where the word intervention came up. And I feel like it's a kind of cross-referenced and a response to architecture.
Thank you. That help. I think that really like pulls it forward into what artists, going back to the historical question is, and then to where you took it and to where some of the other artists have taken it in the decades since.
That is it Eric Weber who did the eggs out there?
Oh, Andy Goldsworthy.
Oh, Andy Goldsworthy. I'm sorry. Yeah, and if you've seen some of his more recent works, he goes out to like streams and he takes items and he, does these beautiful little things that are obviously temporary, and that sort of reminds me a little of this. Is like he's using what he has there, and he does paintings with fall leaves and that kind of thing, and water, and then they're only there for a period of time, but it kind of reminds me of that.
Thank you. And actually, we had considered Andy Goldsworthy on the list. I wanted to stick inside because I feel like any sculpture that goes outside is intervening. It's a little bit different. But he definitely directly references the museum's architecture by using the same stone that the Saarinen wing has as well. So there is that connection and relationship to the museum. Thanks for sharing that.
Sue, I feel like you were talking, but we couldn't hear you. You might need to put it in the chat. Maybe that's what you're doing right now. Okay, yep, she's saying yes. Where are all the Tara Donovans made on site? Laura, you were here with me then, and sometimes they came in pieces, but they all eventually have to be constructed on site. So I remember there were these giant button sculptures that look like stalagmites.
The buttons were shipped in, but the straws, the clouds, the works that were made of glass and pins and toothpicks that were downtown, all of those were constructed on site. I think there was maybe 2 or 3 that were shipped in, but the overwhelming majority of the show had to be reconstructed and then destroyed. But yeah, the button sculpture, and I think there was like one that was like another type of plastic that was shipped in and able to sort of live afterward.
She mentioned the folded mylar. I can't remember what that.
Yeah,
piece
there
was.
was one that it had mylar and it was sort of rolled into what looked like kind of like waves.
Oh, okay.
And that one was constructed on site as well.
I know we.
There
really
was a
have-
tape. There was a Scotch one that was Scotch tape too, which is a nice analogy to obviously drawing in space.
All right, thank you guys so much. I wanted to just let you guys know that if you enjoyed this program, we've got some similar things coming up. First of all, Olivia Valentine's artist talk will be this weekend. I want to say, if you really want to go, I would get on it as soon as this is done, because there's a good chance that it's already full. So if you would love to hear Olivia share her work in her own story, in her own voice, don't miss that, and definitely sign up as soon as you can. I'm so glad that we're selling out a Zoom lecture. So it's a good news, and I mean bad news if you didn't make it. And then after that, if you enjoyed hearing me talk a little bit about art and sharing things, I've got a program coming up called Reflecting on Glass. I don't know if you've been able to visit the Judith Schechter exhibition that's on view in the museum until the end of May, but we're going to be spending a long amount of time looking at just a couple of her works, a slow looking practice, and then hearing some quotes from her and really sharing with one another how they resonate with us. So if that practice sounds interesting to you, go ahead and register for that event that's happening later in this month. So thank you guys again all so much for being here. I really appreciate everyone's time and attention. Joining us all together, being present in one virtual space is a beautiful thing.
Thank you, everyone. And I will say, I hope we will be able to record Olivia's talk. So if you aren't able to get one of those 100 Zoom spaces, you can look for it in a couple weeks and we'll have it up online if all goes well. So Mia, thank you so much.
Thanks. I also wanted to thank Lewis again. I'm so grateful
Yes.
that you were able to jump in and speak with everyone. I just think it's
Thanks
super
for
important.
inviting me. I really appreciate it.
That was the icing on the cake. That was amazing. Thank you, Mr. De Soto.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good night,
guys.
everybody.
Take care.